Hey, welcome to Titan HST's Business Continuity Today, and this is your host, Todd DeVoe speaking. So let's discuss strategies to enhance the risk assessment process and ensuring the proper stakeholders are involved. And let's move beyond those binders with lists and tasks and just lots of paper. A practical risk assessment is fundamental to business continuity. Successful risk assessment helps identifying emergent risks and face the future with confidence. So, risk assessment is a systematic and forward looking analysis of impact and the likelihood of potential future events and scenarios for achieving the organization's business objectives, even after disaster or a crisis. So, the process begins with articulating the organization's goals and objectives. The assessment applies to predetermined risk criteria to a well-defined risk scenarios that could lead to the organizations falling short of achieving their goals. Risk assessment is exploring uncertainty. So what is uncertainty? So uncertainty refers to any situation where leaders do not know the outcome of their decisions. So as Donald Rumsfeld said, there is the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. So do leaders appreciate what they do not know? So this process will help decision makers know what they don't know, and they'll make better informed decisions this way. So the following 10 practices will help management and directors maximize the value derived from the risk assessment process. So 1, involve the appropriate people. Getting the right people on the bus. We talk about the idea of this, of having the right people in the room and making sure we can put them in roles that they need to do. But the problem is different senior executives and unit or ground leaders often have different perspectives and viewpoints regarding what risk is. So therefore, it is essential to involve the appropriate stakeholders in the risk assessment process. So this is including the organization's C-suite and the frontline field leaders. So you also want to reduce the risk of groupthink. So the process should encourage an open and positive dialogue among key executives and stakeholders, identifying and evaluating risks and outcomes. So attention must be given to removing groupthink and cognitive biases. And leaders must listen to dissenting views and should ensure that all perspectives are heard and considered. Use this as a safeguard against team members developing misinformed opinions or reaching conclusions without having engaged in robust debates. Leaders must create a space where executives can air their fears and concerns and discuss critical issues and missed opportunities. Leaders should use the advice from Simon Sinek when it comes to meetings. Be a better listener. Be the last one to speak your opinion in your mind in this meeting. You'll learn the truth of what people are thinking and not what people want to think that you want to hear. So that is very important, because there are times when if you as a leader walk in and put your opinion on the floor, you're going to shut down debate. You need to focus on the dimensions of risk. There are 3 dimensions of risk at this time. So there are the implications of the policy, the possibility of approach with that the approach doesn't align with the organization's goals and objectives and the mission values and the core values. So it's also important that when you're talking about your business continuity plan, that you want to still stay within what your business basic functions are. And then there's the risk of executing the plan. So let's talk about the implications for a minute. When management develops a plan and work through the alternatives with the board, the discussions are made on the risk reward trade-offs. So if you talk about the way universities and colleges have moved from being on-ground classes to classroom classes, there were risk and rewards associated with that. And for instance, students that did not want to go to online classes aren't really happy at this point. Well, with COVID going on, that is the most effective way to do this. So in effect, each alternative strategy has its own distinct risk profile. The possibilities of approach not aligned with the organization's mission and values and cores core values, that is, if you misalign too much, you have the possibility of having, I don't know, just not having the business to be the way that you think it would be. And again, going back to higher education, when students sign up to go to classes, they are looking for that classroom class sometimes. And well, it can lead to reputation loss and brand erosion. So this misalignment is the root of companies losing their way and failing to remember what they're all about. So the risks to executing a strategy are of the dimensions. You have to consider that in your risk assessment process. And, moving those three, the dimensions need to be considered if the company expects to avoid the unintended consequences, and that is that, can you still function as your business as you apply your business continuity plan? 4, understand the assumptions of underlying strategy and get the boards and the executives to be part of that risk assessment process. You should never start making your business continuity plans without getting the entire organization behind it. You should consider how the organization's strategy and risk appetite work in tandem and how it will drive behavior across the organization. In setting business objectives, allocating resources, and making critical decisions, there are risks evaluated in the context of the organization's goals, strategy, and operations. Is adequate consideration given to the microeconomic issues? And is there a business intelligence process for monitoring the environment? So outside of the traditional planning and budgeting to assert strategic assumptions, do they remain valid? So if there is a time when your strategy just isn't valid or is it's no longer correct, what is the process of changing direction, and can you pivot? And are these assumptions stress tested when circumstances are warranted? You need to consider the impact of disruptive changes. So the rapid pace of change in the global business environment is moving fast. There's many risks of all sorts of times. There's digital, industry change, and other risk profiles. So the unique aspect of regarding disruptive change is that it presents a choice. Which side of the change curve does an organization want to be on? And with the speed of change and constant technological advances, the rapid response to new market opportunities and emerging risks can be a significant source of competitive advantage. So your business continuity plan, right, is not just something that you put on your shelf. It actually can help you be competitive during a crisis. Conversely, failure to remain abreast or ahead of the change curve can place an organization in an unattainable position, and you can become captive to the events rather than charting a course. And that position can be lethal. As we see today, many businesses, large businesses, not just the mom and pop businesses, are closing their doors to COVID because they weren't able to pivot when this crisis came. The risk assessment process must be dynamic enough to account for significant change. So let's consider appropriate criteria to assess high impact and low likelihood risks. When considering extreme risk events, the operative question is, how resilient is our organization? Or how quick can we pivot? And if one or more of these events occur, what can we do? Well, here's the thing. Response and readiness and risk criteria to consider when you're considering answering these questions. And what is the level of resilience of the plan in case of alternate scenarios? So is the plan robust enough, or is it too ambitious? And the thing is that you may have multiple crises happening at the same time. So for instance, today we had COVID strike, right? Still going on. And then we had the civil unrest in some of the larger cities. And if your business was in place in those cities, now you're dealing with two crises at the same time. We're talking about the fact that we're going into hurricane season and the fire season with COVID going on. So now you're having to deal with, again, the underlying crisis of COVID, which will be here for a long time, and then the additional seasonal crisis that occur, such as wildfire in the Southwest, and you have the hurricanes in the Southeast. Do you know the level of variation of the expected performance in the short term? What can your business do in the short term? And then, is your short-term plan acceptable? So understand the sources of the risk. One of the most challenging risks management tasks is translating a risk assessment into actionable steps in the business plan. Business owners often don't understand the fact that you have to assign risks to certain organizations within the group, right? Or certain owners of the risk, if you will. And risk owners often don't know how to address the significant risk based on the assessment that is given and displayed on those typical flat charts and two-dimensional graphs. What tools can you give the owners of the risk to be able to actually really understand what the risk is and how to implement this into your business strategy and your plan? If risk scenarios are used during the risk assessment are well defined, the risk owners will have better ideas. But for the most significant risks, it may take a sense to resource and what is the root cause of the disaster. So to better understand them, you have to take a look at the risks and design them from the source, right? So what that is if you're in a communications company, for instance, or say the power companies where you have power lines that are going to be burnt down potentially, that's going to be that risk. And who owns that risk? That's going to be your linesmen and those teams. So they have to, and I'm sure that these guys have a good understanding, but this is what we're talking about here. So the process should be designed to identify patterns and that connect potential interrelated risks to events to be taken in consideration by the risk response and the design. Like I said, risks are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Therefore, they need to be managed not in silos, but as a group together. Don't forget about the emerging risks. A process for identifying emerging risks should be in place to supplement the ongoing risk assessment process. One of the keys to identifying emerging threats is the significance of the time horizon. So, for example, we're talking about environmental, social, and governance issues, and they're becoming increasingly important with each passing year. So the further out you can look, the more significant and relevant these issues appear to be. Think about the culture changes that are happening today, and is your business able to pivot as those things go? So we have, like I said, the civil unrest that is happening today. Are you able to pivot and be able to ready to go to this? So risk considerations into the decision-making process. So it's important that the risk assessment process is maybe just as crucial to talk about decision-making processes to consider significant decisions on the organization's risk profile. If risks are to be understood, it's the distribution of possible outcomes. So over a given time horizon, due to the changes in critical underlying variables, it should be noted that significant decisions either create different issues that alter previously considered outcomes. So decisions have bearing on outcomes. And so if you're making a decision on one hand and you make another decision on the other, it might have an adverse effect. So communication during this process is very important. As a result, significant decisions should be considered the baseline of the risk assessment. And the organization's risk appetite, so you must involve the board promptly. And 10, never end with just a list. Effective risk assessment should always lead to formulation of response and close those gaps that they identify. Therefore, following the completion of a formal or informal risk assessment, management should designate the appropriate risk owners, which we talked about earlier. For newly identified risk, to design appropriate risk response and accountability structures for their execution. So, The above practices can help organizations define their specific risks and assess the adequacy of the processing and information risk management and board risk oversight. An effective risk assessment process lays the foundation for management and directors to navigate a changing business environment confidently. Thank you for spending your time with me today. And please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and your favorite podcast player. From the team at Titan HST, stay safe, stay sound, and stay hydrated.